I get focused on different things as I'm gaining more knowledge in this crazy world of counseling and mental health. And I've gotten focused on a viewpoint of looking at things like getting in touch with the inner child. And I think I've done a video in the past on defenders, and this kind of falls in line with defenders, but it uses some different terminology, and it encourages us to be kind to ourselves. I've talked about that before, self-talk. This definitely falls in line with the idea of self-talk, and I'll link that one below in the comments section. But I want to share with you this idea of the inner child, and a lot of this comes from a book called The Loving Parent Guidebook. And this book, it's not a parenting book per se, sort of, but if you were to stumble upon that book and just looking through resources, you would think it was a way to learn to parent your kids better. But it's actually a book that's focused on learning to reparent yourself and be your own loving parent. And it uses these terms that identify different parts of ourselves. And the first one that I want you to think about is the inner child. The inner child is the part of us that could have been if it weren't for imperfect parenting. And if you think about what a child is spontaneous. A child is authentic. They're even impulsive at times. I remember when I was a kid, my mom took me to her work, and I was very, very little. I don't know why I remember this, probably because of her reaction. But she took me to her work, and she introduced me to some coworkers. And she said, "This is so-and-so and so-and-so." And I, as a kid, being authentic and being spontaneous, I said, "You're really fat." That's what kids do. They just say what's on their minds. They're not worried about hurting people's feelings. What you see is what you get with kids. And my mom, just was very afraid of that. But that's what a kid does. That's who they are. Before the world gets a hold of kids, they are just themselves. They're not worried about holding back their emotions and that sort of thing. They just put it all out there, and they're taught that's not what we do. You don't act that way. So that's what an inner child is. It's who we would have been. So we have that part of ourselves, but we also have a part that's called a critical parent, according to this book, the inner critical parent. And this is the part of us that says, you need to be quiet, or they don't want you in this room, or you don't belong here, or nobody wants to listen to your point of view. All these negative self-talk. I referenced that negative self-talk earlier. You're stupid. This is pointless. Don't waste your time. There's no point. This is that negative self-talk, but it's from this viewpoint, it's the inner critical parent. And we've got the inner child, who's got these feelings, and they're scared or they're sad. And then the inner critical parent comes along and says, nobody wants to hear about that. Just keep your mouth shut. Hold it in. Go to your room. Don't come out till you figure it out. That's what parenting was in the 80s. Just go in your room and stay in there, and you'll figure it out. It's like, I'm 5. I don't even have words to put with what I'm feeling right now. So I feel like I should be able to process through these emotions. And then you've got an adult saying, go in your room and figure it out. Well, it's the parents, so they must be right. So we just go in our rooms and try to figure out existential crisis we're in. But imagine a 5-year-old trying to use this language and this knowledge and everything. It's not fair for kids. And so that voice of our parents, that they're doing the best they can, but they're trying to coach in the best way they know how. That voice, it becomes our own voice. Okay? So when that child thinks, I need to keep my mouth shut because my parents keep telling me to keep my mouth shut, well, if I want to have love and acceptance, then I need to learn to keep my mouth shut without them telling me that. So when I feel this urge to say something, no, I need to hold it in. Well, that gets wired into our brains. We've talked about neuroplasticity in a previous video. And, our brains get rewired out of our experiences. And so this voice becomes our own voice. It becomes the inner critical parent. And that gets wired in over and over and over again. And I'm 38 now, and so I have self-doubt, I have anxiety. I start getting into new situations and I think, am I good enough to be in this situation? That's an inner critical parent. And we could be really hard on the inner critical parent because, it's a pretty harsh message. But we need to remember that even that voice is trying to keep the inner child from having the abandonment that it fears. And so it's trying to prevent future abandonment by continuing to walk out that message. So that's the inner critical parent. It becomes part of us. The inner teenager is the third part. And this teenager is the one who sees the inner child and cares for the inner child and is trying to take care of the inner child in the best way that he or she knows how. This is the part of us, even if you weren't an angry, resentful teenager, but this is the part of us, stereotypical teenager, that's angry, resentful, rebellious. This part of us is the one that lashes out at others, or this part of us may engage in addictions, in compulsions, in impulsivity, whatever it may be, unhealthy coping styles. It's the inner teenager. And again, we would say, hey, that's really bad. But we need to remember that also the teenager is just attempting to take care of the child in the best way that he or she knows how, but doesn't have the guidance of how to process through those emotions. So the teenager means well, but just isn't doing things in the most effective way. So we have the inner child, we have the inner teenager, and we have the inner critical parent. And according to this book, what we need to work on doing is learning to be our own loving parent. And so when we find ourselves being afraid or being sad or whatever that feeling is, generally the inner child has the feelings of fear or sadness. What I've started doing is just kind of pulling myself to the side as a little kid here, pulling the little kid to the side, just kind of squeezing them a little bit. It's like, hey bud, you okay? What's going on, bud? Are you all right? I can see you're upset. Like I can see you're scared, and that's okay. You're allowed to be scared. Sometimes things are scary. And I'll start to have that conversation with this little child that when I look at myself at 38, it's hard for me to pull myself aside. Hey, bud. I'm like, hey, dude, knock it off, That's how I want to talk to a 38-year-old that I'm really close with. But when we look at ourselves as the inner child, we have a little bit more compassion for kids generally. And that kid's still in there. He's still got those feelings. He's still got those fears. This is a kid that got stuck in an elevator in a cave. That's a scary experience. It's all right, bud. Things happen and the world's a scary place. And, you've made it through things before. We're going to make it through this, and it's okay that you're scared. We're going to do this anyway. We're not going to let fear hold us back. The loving parent doesn't necessarily let the kid off the hook. It's not that we say, oh, you get to do whatever you want, but he guides the kid in a way that maybe that child didn't receive, and he does it in a very loving way. There may be even some correction in there, where you say, hey, that's not the way we act, bud, So we learn to have compassion for that part of ourselves, that inner child. And then when we have the voice of the inner critical parent that's like, knock it off, quit being afraid, it's no big deal. We even step in as the loving parent and set healthy boundaries within ourselves. I appreciate that you've tried to keep this kid safe. Like, that's really good, and I appreciate that. But, that's a pretty harsh thing that you're saying, and the kid's scared. And I'm going to step in and take care of this. So I've got it this time, so thank you. We set those inner boundaries with ourselves, and if that inner critical parent continues to push, just like we would with anybody else, we set stronger boundaries. I said to stop. This is what we're going to do. We're not going to say this right now. I'm going to take care of it. I need you to stop. We have firmer boundaries, but again, it's coming from that place of the loving parent that's trying to take care of these parts of ourselves. When that teenager steps in and is angry and lashes out, or when some sort of unhealthy coping style is present, the loving parent steps in and says, hey, appreciate what you've done. I know you mean well, but I'm going to love on this kid right now. And we've got to earn the trust of that teenager to let him or her know that we mean well and we can follow through with what we're going to say, and we're going to care for the kid. So I want to leave those thoughts with you, and hopefully they're helpful to you. Being in touch with your inner child, understanding your inner teenager and how you've tried to keep the kid safe, and then also knowing what that inner critical parent is trying to do, recognizing when the inner critical parent is stepping in, and then learning to be the loving parent, to reparent yourself and have a better way of communicating with these parts of yourself that offer correction and guidance, but also unconditional love and acceptance.